not Willis. Second thing is that he's a Mexican and has come a long way here. And we'd like to thank him for coming all the way from Mexico, Missouri. Back into the third thing you need to know about him. One of the funny things about public schools is that the children learn that if you don't like something, you can change it. You just need to get together and send a letter to President Obama saying that the Antarctic ice is shrinking, even though it's not, and then, you can change things. Have this sense of optimism. Well, Bruce doesn't have quite that sense of optimism. He's been making a real pest of himself in Jefferson City with the legislators for a very long time. He knows a lot of them. He knows their foibles and their weaknesses, things like that. And his perspective is the same as ours. He puts it in 2 words: economic freedom. You can think of it as good government. He's often called on to testify in favor of bills that the sponsors know will fail, but he does it anyway. So what's he going to talk about today? Well, there are certain things that we know from experience that Democrats do a lot better than Republicans. So, if I'm not mistaken, the topic that Bruce is going to talk about is the proper way to text an intern. Bruce Hillis.
Hey, thank you, Hunter. He's pretty close to what I'm going to talk about. As I said when I first came in, someone asked me what I was going to talk about this afternoon, and I said, I'll ramble on about something. So,
One thing he did not mention, and I saw this trying to find some information on you. I checked all the jail records. You were clear there. But you ran for lieutenant governor in 2004. Is that correct?
More like I walked.
You walked. Well, whatever.
That's another story.
But that's something I think our guy people would be interested in knowing. He ran as a Republican for that seat.
Yeah. Well, Hunter's introduction, speculated what I'm actually talking about. Of course, this may be the old bait and switch, but I'll talk about something anyway. The little bio or the announcement that Fred put out was that had my name, Bruce Hillis, a retired businessman and advocate for free markets and constitutional governance. And Hunter properly clarified that for me, and he is right. It is the economic freedom that I advocate for. And then the citizen lobbyist was the other thing. So I'd like to start talking a little bit about what I do and who I like to do it, try to do it too sometimes. And then follow up with my primary advocacy of the area that I really concentrate on, and some of the reasons that change doesn't happen, and some of the reasons bad change does happen. And maybe I can give you my insight or perspective onto that. Retired businessman, I stepped down as I was in the long-term care business, nursing homes and assisted living company. I was president of AmeriCare Systems out of Sykeston, Missouri for about 20 years. In that role, believe me, I saw a lot of the topic that I'm going to talk about, touch on today, being regulations. I think maybe nursing homes and long-term care industry is about as regulated as the atomic energy. At least that's kind of what we thought it was. And there's some examples I might cite that's related to that, but that's not really the area of my advocacy or the area that I'm going to really speak on. It will be on free markets. I'm not a political operative. I really don't get involved in politics that much. I don't belong to patriot groups or tea parties. I've never been really a joiner of anything. So for that reason, I'm not part of an advocacy group. I'm not part of a citizens grassroots group. Matter of fact, the only PAC I have is spelled with a K, and that's the thing I carry things in when I go to advocate in Jefferson City, the only one I got strung over my shoulder, my back. Why am I an advocate? Why did I come here, and what brought me to this point? What things involved me in becoming a citizen advocate, or activist, if you will. When I stepped down as president of AmeriCare in 2001, during that 20-year tenure, that little company we built from no facilities in 1981 to around 75 or 80 facilities, properties in 2001, in that 20-year span. And it's still thriving, and I still stir the pot once in a while when I'm called to ask something by the company. But my time was real limited during that time. It was concentrated on work and building the company. I didn't have time, even though I saw the invasive kinds of regulations and intervention in that industry. They were unnecessary, uncalled for, off target, whatever you want to call it. I didn't spend a lot of time advocating in Jefferson City, as many people don't. Many of you can't. You're too busy building a company, or too busy working to spend your time. So it was not until in 2003, was my first kind of entry into political activity in the form of activism that started. There was an incident when Holden was governor that I took a personal affront to, and not a political affront to, but a personal affront, that when he, at the behest of Dick Gephardt, who was running for president, was in South Carolina. And at that time, there was a little controversy, if you may recall, in South Carolina over a battle flag over the state capitol, Confederate battle flag. Well, besides being an activist, I'm a little bit of a genealogist, and I've studied my family history, et cetera, and what they did, what motivated them in the Great War between the states as Confederates. So when Bob Holden took the battle flag downs at over 2 state cemeteries in Missouri, Higginsville and Pilot Knob, I made my way to Jefferson City. We got a bill that year to create a board over all the historic assets that are owned by the state, so that we could try to insulate it from political activity. We weren't successful. In subsequent years, we did get it to the floor a couple of times. It was just too controversial to get it accomplished. That's kind of what got me started. But naturally, my involvement in a highly regulated industry, as I continued to retire, because I went from 5 days a week to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to try to wean myself on work, because that's what I had done. So I tried to slow down, and while I was slowing down, I started filling my time advocating various things at first. Judge Roy Moore came to town. I had a resolution to support his Constitutional Restoration Act back then. It was a federal thing. We got it passed for the House, the concurrent, or House resolution, I mean. So other things that I saw that I thought there was things going wrong, I started getting involved myself. But more specifically, my main advocacy, or focus of my advocacy, is right now is in the area of regulations. Regulations are a big impact on economic freedom. So economic freedom, while that's one I advocate for, and Missouri is in the ditch on economic freedom. If any of you were at the Boone County Pachyderm Club the other evening, I'd asked Bev Randles a question. And prefacing that question said, Missouri, has a dismal record. It ranks 38th among the 50 U.S. states and 10 Canadian provinces on the North America Economic Freedom Index. It ranks 38th. And these are scholarly works taking a lot of categories of impact of regulation of government involved in what produces economic freedom. One of those categories is regulations. And so that's the area that I gravitated to in my advocacy. More specifically, I gravitated to occupational regulations. Because economic freedom, my favorite definition of economic freedom is by the Pacific Research Institute, which says economic freedom is the right of individuals to pursue their interests through voluntary exchange of private property under rule of law. It is individuals, whether those individuals own small businesses or whatever it is, the individuals. And so it is for the individual principally that I advocate. Small businesses, they have a lot of partners in working and advocating for things that need to be done and need to be changed. Businesses of nature, but you've seen it in print all the time. You see, what policies that we should do to improve for small businesses or business in nature. Missouri's done it, and there's nothing wrong with people advocating that. I'm not saying that. It should be better for businesses. Economic freedom, though, is for everybody. And so in occupational regulations, where I really focus is more specifically to the individual and the impact of them. Regulations. I don't know if you've heard it, but they're a lot like the weather. Everybody talks about it, and nobody does much about it. And I'm going to try to explain my perception of why a little bit. Not that the attempts aren't made. You can hardly pick up any political brochure, and you won't find trim back regulations, scale back regulations. That's one of my objectives or one of my goals. But it's not easy to accomplish. Whether it's for the individual or for small businesses or everything in total or combined. Well, what are regulations? There's been some writing by, there's a $140 book out there that published in 2013 that tries to explain what people don't understand about regulations, and I could probably point some things that I don't think the writer of the book even understands, because they try to limit it. First of all, the regulations I'm talking about are at the state level and not at the federal level. But it's a state level. It's not just the rules written pursuant to a law. It is often the law itself that is the regulation that impacts, intervenes, restricts, mandates, promotes, tries to do things that affects economic freedom. Going back to the Pacific Research Institute, here's what they say about regulations. Just a quick thing. Government regulation imposes restrictions on people's behavior. That's what regulations do. Not just red tape. Not just things, busy work, things you have to do to comply, records you got to keep. It's mostly interventions that affect behavior, either negatively or sometimes even positively. They go on and give a clearer definition of that, but that's in the essence of what regulations that I'm opposed to do. They restrict, mandate, require, promote advantage of one group over another group, etc. Where's Missouri ranking in that area? Now, the index that I referred to on economic freedom that has us 38th among the 60 states and Canadian provinces, although they look at regulations, ability to trade, and some components to come at this scholarly approach to determining the index, they don't really set out, and I can't demonstrate from their records what we rank on regulations. But the Pacific Research Institute in 2008 said Missouri was 36th on regulations. Pretty dismal. But again, what are we talking about when we're talking about regulations? We have to get down and get specific as to what is the issue that causes change or behavior, negatively or positively, that impacts economic freedom. So there's really no definition on it. There's a great demonstration that I can call on to or recall about Walt Kelly, who is a cartoonist. Pogo is one of his cartoons. In 1971, I believe, he had a cartoon that was a two-phase cartoon. He drew for Earth Day, I believe, in 1971. That first started off, the first part of the cartoon says, "Isn't this a pristine place, this jungle we live in?" And then the next series in the cartoon, and I might be able to show you that. The next slide in the cartoon, here it is. You can't see it. It says, what you see is Pogo and sitting there talking. It says, and they're looking out over the forest, and it's just strewn with junk. That's what it is. And he said, "It is hard walking on this stuff." He said, "Yep, son, we have met the enemy, and the enemy is us." Regulations, whether they're by statute or burdensome kind of just bureaucratic stuff that's red tape, but most of the things come from the law written. It's stuff that we have promoted at some point in time. It's hard for us not to be self-interested and want to advocate for something that's worse for somebody else, but it may be better for us. And that's what regulations are. Our codes are strewn with such regulations. Madison, one of my favorites in Federalist 42, said, "A good government implies two things. First, fidelity to the object of government, which is the happiness of the people." Remember, Mr. Jefferson said his pursuit of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And happiness is property, or the things we accumulate, or things we do, etc. Secondly, is a knowledge by the means by which the object can best be obtained. He went on to say, "Some governments are deficient in both of these qualities. Most governments are deficient in the first. I scruple not to assert that in American government, too little attention has been paid to the last, recognizing even what these things do and then what to do about it." But that is one part of it. The big part of it is, why is reform or making changes hard to do? There's been a lot of attempts. But Rob Mayer, who I know is from Dexter, that's where I grew up, in Dexter, or Stoddard County, Missouri. Rob Mayer, he had a whole campaign of little committees assigned by all the senators, and they spent several days or a week, even not doing much in session, trying to look at ways to reduce regulation. Hardly anything that I know. I don't know of a single thing that came out of it. Last year, Speaker Jones had a thing that he initiated. At least I understand he did. I never talked to him. Someone from Americans for Prosperity contacted me and said, "Hey, Bruce, have you been asked to serve on this?" And I said, "I don't want to serve on it. What I will do is give you a lot of my opinions and suggestions," which I did. A couple, 3 or 4 pages of written material. I never heard anything was ever accomplished. And the reason it's hard to accomplish, the same people that advocated to put these things on the books are advocating to keep them from coming off of the books. Every law of restrictive nature has its constituency. It has backers that promote it, want it, got it there, and that's for us, and my golly, don't try to take it away. So, Paul Kelly was right. We have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. Yes, sir.
Bruce, could you give us some of the maybe egregious examples that you run into as far as occupational license?
Yeah, be glad.
So we can
Be glad, because since that's the area that I really work on. Let me start with one I'm kind of familiar with, and then I'm going to talk about some of the others that's come up that I've advocated against. I told you I came out of the nursing home industry. Well, our company, all those facilities we had. By the way, Tiger Place is one of our properties here in town, if you know that, and Bluff Creek Estates, etc. But anyway, in 2006, we have occupational license for nursing home administrators. like I say, it's one of the heaviest regulated kind of entities or types of industries, I think, in the country. I can yell loud enough, you can pull it out. Highly regulated. You have the facility is first licensed in mind. Nobody's objecting to that because on licensing of facilities, it isn't necessarily preferential treatment. There isn't any way, that is maybe protection of the public. There isn't any preferential treatment on licensing of the facility. But that you have the director of nurses license, you have the licensed nurse, practical nurses, you have certification for aides, and you have administrator's license, for example. Have a whole board to manage a nursing home administrator. I'll try to speed this up real quick. In 2006, a bill was created to designate residential care centers that wanted to be higher level care, assisted living. In that law, assisted living facilities had to have a license, nursing home license, or administrator's license. The only license available at that time for administrators was nursing home administrator's license. High level of care, lower level of care. Although they had the statutory authority of the board to issue a separate license, it took 5 years and $150,000 in legal costs to force the Board of Nursing Home Administrators to create a license just for these assisted living administrators, which is much lower level of care. First of all, they never monitor, manage, and look at the kind of things that need to be a good administrator, but that's another question. And why is that? We had nursing home administrators, we had nursing homes, and we had assisted living facilities. The nursing home people that dominate the board don't want competition from assisted living facilities. So they make it just as tough through the board activity to pursue your work. Missouri is what in occupational regulations, we haven't had a new category since 2006. That's if I don't count assistant physicians, which I advocated for because it was really free enough to allow somebody to work that was not yet licensed as a physician, if you know that bill. That was a great bill, by the way. But we haven't had a new category of occupational licensing since 2006. We've had many attempts. 2003 is auctioneers. We've had attempts at home inspectors. This year, music therapist. Maria Von Trapp rolled over in her grave when they brought that up. But we've had many attempts to do it. But getting any kind of reform to the existing one is like pulling teeth with, driving nails in your mouth, something. It's tough because they have their constituency. One representative whom I admire, I suggested he was trying to bite off more than he could chew, but he had a bill about 3 years ago, I guess, that was going to eliminate several categories of licensure, including cosmetology. Well, the Capitol was overrun. So it's hard to make any reform. And by the way, that reform is needed in all of these. And that one, wherever your position stands, there's reform needed. Because what is wrong with most of these, here's how they act. Here's how they react. They get a license, they get a bill to create a license and a board to govern them. They usually exempt or grandfather everybody that's in working now so they don't have opposition from them people, those groups. And they get the new board, and then they start inching up the requirements, which cuts out more and more people from being able to pursue employment. There's a study to show that the impact financially to prices and employment, well, the cost of things is about equivalent to unionism, about 15%. But the big problem of that, to the individuals being able to pursue economic freedom, the big impact is it's tougher to find a way to go to work with the kind of requirements that you have. The home inspector bill that was attempted for several years would get beaten down. It wouldn't have allowed me to identify a house and call the best builder that I know and have him go evaluate the home and tell me by report, and me pay him for an evaluation of that home, even if he's the best builder in town, because he wouldn't be a licensed inspector under the law. So the definitions under these occupational regulations of the things they can do limits other people being able to do it for compensation. Case in point, cosmetology. You can't, for a fee, wash somebody's hair, even in a nursing home, without a licensed cosmetologist. They don't enforce that one, but technically that's what the law says. So hope that answers your question about, there are many of them. Missouri's one of the best. About 40 some, the Reason Foundation shows that Missouri's got like 41 classes of occupational licensing or regulation. California has 177. Go try that one on. They have a board, I guess, for everything out there to work. We're trying to get some reform. Chuck will tell you that Eric Burleson had a bill. We got it out of the House this year to do some reform for occupational license. It couldn't change anything then. No, you'd have too many people riled up about that. But any new occupational regulation laws or groups had to justify to the committee of reference why it was necessary to have this licensing group. Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, isn't there even licensing required if someone wants to braid hair professionally?
Well, it's a cosmetology license. You cannot rub somebody's shoulder for compensation. You can't braid hair. We had a bill this year got heard, but it didn't get very far. And it's going to happen in Missouri. We're going to get an exemption because the Institute for Justice has brought a lawsuit in St. Louis, and in federal court in St. Louis, and they have never lost anywhere where they attempted to get this hair braiding thing overturned because it's so preposterous.
And to get that licensing, it's my understanding, I don't remember.
1,500 hours.
Yes.
1,500 hours.
Which is a lot of schooling that someone has to pay for so they can braid someone's hair.
And they don't teach it in cosmetology school.
Yeah. It's just insane.
Hey, Bruce, let me ask a question. Would it be better if some of these license requirements were transitioned to certification requirements?
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe that would be a way
Absolutely.
to try to get us out of it.
Morris Kleiner has demonstrated in the state of Wisconsin, in that state, I believe it's Wisconsin, could be Minnesota, so forgive me, my memory. It would add 15,000 jobs in that state if they went, just the occupational thing went from certification to certification for licensure. Licensure is generally tagged and defined, of course, under this reform bill, we're getting all these definitions in the law, and they had the reform was they had to demonstrate the need, but then it would be the least restrictive possible, and that's what nobody's objecting to protection of the public, but that's not what we got. So the certification is generally described as title protection, but that doesn't keep somebody else from working. Think CPAs, for instance, certified public accountants. They're title protected. You can't use the name certified public accountant. I was an accountant in my work life. Can you imagine the number of people that would be thrown out of work today if suddenly they said everybody that does payroll, bookkeeping, general ledger clerks, accountants, etc., had to pass the CPA exam and all the requirements before they could practice as payroll. I'd challenge, there'd be thousands probably here in Columbia alone that would be out of work. And that's the effect of occupational licensing and why I'm against it. It keeps people from pursuing gainful employment. It's not the only regulations, there's others, but that's one, and that's the one that I work on the most.
Hey, Bruce, you're not read enough yet.
Okay.
Here's another little area. The certificate of need for hospitals, that's a big deal in town with.
Sure. Well, the certificate of need for nursing homes. Certificates of necessity are where the state decides if something not only is needed, but does it serve a useful purpose sometime. For the state to decide if something is of necessity and serve a useful purpose, the market decides that. But yet, in household movers up until 2012 in Missouri, you could get a ticket to move household goods from Columbia, Missouri to Columbia, South Carolina. But if you wanted to move household goods from Columbia, Missouri to Joplin, Missouri, you know what you had to do? You had to go get a certificate of necessity from the Department of Transportation. And what did the Department of Transportation do under the law? They had to ask all the other movers in in your area if this would impact their business. And they come back and say, of course it'll reduce our revenue. There wasn't one challenged new household mover in decades in Missouri. Thankfully, with a little bit of advocacy, advocating for a bill, it was Burleson's bill attached to something else that finally got passed, but mainly a little bit of litigation by the Pacific Legal Foundation that helped get that done too. Because the people's self-interest, they don't want competition. So if the law allowed them to require a certificate of necessity, certificate of need for hospitals and nursing homes, same thing. Can you imagine if there was a certificate of necessity for barbershops and catfish farms? That's what we got deciding is there useful need and purpose for this hospital. So you've got legislated commission making those decisions on who should be the person to get the new hospital or new facility and what service they are to offer, basically. Another question?
It's always seemed to me that there's a few bad apples in every profession. And administratively from the state, it's much easier to pass a board or commission than to go after those bad apples and get them out of the profession.
Well, we got over 200 boards and commissions in Missouri. And many of those are occupational boards, others are not, other park boards, and different things. And many of them, I maintain, not many, there's a few still remaining I maintain are not constitutional. And the Board of Nursing Home Administrators was one of them. They've since fixed that. And that was where we spent $150,000 on legal fees. It wasn't constitutional. Because the Missouri Constitution has two things. One, the separation of powers doctrine. One section can't do what another, the legislature can't do what the executive branch does, and vice versa with the judiciary. Before they made the change, pursuant to this push on this lawsuit, the boards and commissions are all selected by the governor. That's clear in the Constitution with the advice and consent of the Senate. There's a couple of boards still exist, and I won't name them, because they may want to use that at some point in time, that are not constitutional, because what has happened is the law that enacted the commission says, and CON is one of them, though I'll tell you that, certificate of need is unconstitutional because the law that set up that says that 2 members of the House and 2 members of the Senate, plus so many members at large appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. They don't have a choice of picking House members and senators to be on the CON committee. It has to be selected by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. But it's another issue. Somebody else have another question?
You've done a lot of work on this. I don't want to get you too far off the subject, but
And I don't
on
want to
tax credits in the past.
Well, I have done some tax credit stuff. I've testified and done that, but it's not been my principal area. There was a time, though, a few years ago, I've been at this 12, 13 years. I've been there with term limits. I'm hoping they'll pass the term limit so I can get turned out. I mean, honestly, so I don't need to go back. But tax credits, I testified early on against some tax credits when there would be no opposition. Now we're getting some. When I first started advocating, we had a few citizens that was working on it, issues like this, but that was before Americans for Prosperity and Club for Growth and a few others. So other people are kind of attacking those, but I've been in hearings where the room is full and not one other person testified against the tax credit. As a matter of fact, my opening remarks one time was, after the opponents usually get to testify after the proponents, I went up and I said, I want you to know, Mr. Chairman, I'm holding on to my wallet because I can see what people are motivated in this room, what they want. And that's exactly what they're there with the request for tax credits and advocating for them. Another question? So how do we change the paradigm? I'm not a politician, and I'm loath to say that, to make recommendations on how to do it via the political process. But from a businessman, I know when you set goals and objectives, they have to be three things in them. They have to be specific, they have to be measurable, and they have to be time-bound. To hold anybody accountable for achieving a goal or an objective. And brochures that says I want to do something ain't enough. You got to nail your legislative candidates down to saying what specifically are you going to do and what time measurement and when are you going to do it so I can help you work on it. Not just some comment like scale back regulations. If you use the legislative process, identify a champion. May not be just your legislator, but look at somebody to see on the area of interest that you want to scale back or work on. Try to identify somebody that will champion the issue. You know, most bills are not drafted, without a request from somebody. You can make that request. You can pursue a subject. That's all I tried to do, is pursue subjects. Reform of occupational licensing, the mover bill, a few things like that. And Hunter is right. Don't think that there's going to be immediate success. If nothing else, what you can work on is try to kill something. It's a lot easier to kill a bill than it is to get a bill passed. So work to kill something, to testify against it, or urge support against it. Because one thing most legislators don't like is controversy. They don't like, so they will want the sides to work it out, but don't ever work it out. Demand that it be repealed or eliminated. Get rid of something. Via grassroots lobbying, that's or activism, or advocacy, that's the way I do it. That kind of, go ahead, one other question, go ahead, I've got plenty of time.
I have a real radical view about licensing.
Okay, sir.
This thing comes up every year as far as veterinary licensing. There's always some people in St. Louis especially that want to do massage and acupuncture, and they want to work on horses' teeth. And I say, fine, let them do it. The one thing I learned, not long out of veterinary school, I worked at a racetrack. And I had one of my first jobs under a good veterinarian was to work on teeth of a whole barn full of thoroughbred 2-year-olds. Now that's a lot of fun. I say, anybody that wants to do that can have that job, float the teeth and pop the caps, but I don't care about that. But I'm to the point where I don't believe in licensing. And before everybody jumps on me, I believe that now this is veterinary medicine, I admit, but it can relate to other things. I believe that if the school is proud of their graduate, they ought to give a license from that state. Now, as far as controlling, yes, have a state board for infractions. Now, the federal government has different rules for us. We have to be accredited to do interstate work and certain vaccinations and testing. But, and also there's meat and dairy regulations, there's all this kind of stuff. But I'm to the point for let the market decide. If there's a bad veterinarian out there it's not gonna be long before he loses his practice. Now, he may lose some animals too first.
So, and the same for hairdressers, I mean, you know, having some regulations regarding public safety, I understand. But it ought to be demonstrated before you say automatically that every license that's the purpose of it. This reform measure that we had going, here's basically what it proposed. The purpose of section 324, blah, 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 to promote the general welfare by establishing guidelines for the regulation of occupations and professions not regulated prior to January 1, 2016. And here's the critical area. All individuals may engage in an occupation of their choice, free from unreasonable government regulation. The state may not impose a substantial burden on an individual's pursuit of his or her occupation or profession unless there is a compelling interest for the state to protect the general welfare. And that's described over here as general welfare. If such an interest exists, the regulation adopted by the state shall be the least restrictive type of regulation consistent with the public interest to be preserved. We've got occupational regulations that's never demonstrated what the public interest is. We've got, in other areas of regulations, if you go over in trade and commerce section, I call it restraint of trade and commerce because that's what most of it does. They have as a purpose clause to promote an orderly marketplace. That's not the role of government. Protecting the citizens is the role of government. Promoting an order. Most of them wouldn't understand what an orderly marketplace is. A marketplace is never orderly. Robust competition. We can't have competition. That's not orderly. That's what that section is. So we've had a lot of attempts to, in the franchise area, we've had attempts at the law to change the beer deal, I call it. The distributors wanted to come up and say, hey, we don't want manufacturers being in the distribution business, so we want the franchise law so that our contracts are protected so nobody can compete with us. Notwithstanding the fact that their contract probably didn't allow competition, that's where it should be stated. Just a couple of years ago, we had the Tesla thing, the Tesla automotive, wanting to prevent Tesla from selling its cars directly in Missouri by creating a new law in the franchise agreement. Both of those got beat down, thank goodness. So there's been some successes in killing deals because it's a lot easier. There's been a little reform. Everybody's got a constituency. Sometimes it's not even recognized as a constituency. In the case of cosmetology, it's not the cosmetologist. That's not who's against changing the cosmetology bill. It's cosmetology school owners that require 1,500 hours before you can be a licensed cosmetologist. Under the law, only licensed cosmetology schools can teach this. You have to look through it sometime. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for you. Can I go one more?
Can I continue on?
Sure, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you didn't. Excuse me, I interrupted. To continue on with this, I think in many cases, for example, California had a test for veterinarians from out of state. It was different from the California graduate test. And they made sure, passing was 80, and they made sure that everybody from out of state got 79 because California wanted to have their own graduates have first choice. Now, many times these licensing people have it on their minds to keep everybody else out. You get in, like, if you become a PhD, you try and keep everybody else from becoming a PhD. But the idea is, to me, to pass a test, well, I was asked to participate in designing examinations for the Missouri State Board when I was at the university a number of years ago. And my area was bovine medicine, I guess you'd say, and so they assigned that to me, and so I said, okay, I'm going to submit this question. one question and a list of diseases, and for each disease you describe the symptoms, the cause, the treatment, everything, but describe in short sentences. Well, that was unacceptable. It has to be multiple choice. Now, what does a multiple choice examiner do? Generally, you have one you can throw out of the 5. Then you have 4 that are a little closer, but maybe another one you can throw out. Then you have 3, there may be one word difference, and they're long. And you have to select that. It's not an idea of gaining knowledge, it's an idea of tricking you to try to keep you out. And that originates from, guess where? Academia. It does not originate from the practicing veterinarian.
Give you an example here in Missouri. License of electricians is under the jurisdiction of cities, counties, some places, cities, not the state. There's no statewide licensing on electricians. And many of the local jurisdictions, just like the state of California did, and I've had one mayor even acknowledge this to me personally. Yes, indeed, we try to keep out electricians coming from other places to work in our state. Well, when they favor their local electricians, they're disfavoring their local other constituents because they're going to pay higher prices for their product, etc. But all these local jurisdictions, St. Louis does it, you look at your own city sometime. They have a board here to license electricians, and electricians sit on the board. And they keep out people. A little trickery. The examination's only scheduled here, but the bidding ends here. You know, I'm sorry, you're not going to get it this year. Somebody wants to come in and bid on a project. The timing on things. The interview process, all subjective. Kind of an interview thing when you do an interview. It's instead of just and that's what we ought to go to in cosmetology and others, is more testing approach than experience and other qualifications, I think. But that, so the electricians have tried to get a bill. Unfortunately, they're not seeking just certification that would require the local jurisdictions have to recognize their certification. They're seeking licensure, which will eventually keep everybody else from working. And though you may not know it, and it seems counterintuitively, the higher the restrictions on license of electricians, the more frequent there are of electrocutions in the jurisdiction. Sound counterintuitive? It does, doesn't it? But it didn't. You know why? Because the supply is reduced. People that could do some of the work, they can't get the license. So the price goes up. Fewer people can perform the job as licensed electricians. More homeowners try to go do it themselves and get electrocuted. That's happens. There's a study to demonstrate that, scholarly work. It's not me saying that.
And then if you don't have an electrician do the work, if you're building a house, then you can't get it approved if somebody's doing it as well.
Correct. Yeah, Chuck.
Just curious what you feel about term limits.
Well, one way I'm real opposed to term limits. Because besides advocating, you need to educate. And I spend a lot of my time, and you and I really never spent much time together because it's mostly focused on people that in the committees, etc., where I work. But the guy, Eric Burleson, is a real champion in this area. He's going to be gone next year. I ain't got 8 more years to try to educate a chair of that committee. Or spend time trying to educate. Maybe have somebody who don't want to know. So from that perspective, I hate it. I mean, I probably won't go advocate to reinstall term limits because it's just, that's trying to educate a whole new group on why I think I'm right. But